Hi everyone, my name is Georgia Harrison, and I'm excited to present virtually to you some work on evaluating variation in response to land management outcomes using some big data approaches. This work I completed alongside Brandon Bestelmeyer, Laura Burkett, Darren James, and Sarah McCord, all at the USDA-ARS experimental range. And I just started a new job at Montana State University, so I'm sad to miss you, but happy to join from afar. So very briefly, I know that Brian is going to talk more about this within the session. Restoration, especially in Western rangelands, maybe areas that have burned a lot recently, is happening at a really broad scale, and it's definitely needed. But there's large swaths of lands that are being treated using a whole bunch of different techniques, and there are definitely a lot of ongoing questions about where these treatments are the most effective, and questions about, how can we maybe best spend our management dollars and management efforts to get the best outcome. And traditionally, this can be really hard to evaluate because in heterogeneous landscapes, vegetation response to management interventions is also heterogeneous. So the response to a single treatment, especially in these very large remote areas, can be variable and is hard to assess using traditional field techniques. And if we had a magic 8 ball that we could shake and ask where land treatments would be the most successful or where we should go and monitor, that would be excellent, but we don't have one of those quite yet. And so as a result, we traditionally have to use a suite of statistical approaches to assess treatment effects. And traditionally, this relies on comparing well-matched field observations in treated and similar untreated areas. And so this can be done using, soil maps, local information, walking out on the land, all sorts of information sources to get a good match, but still requires, abundant field observations to be confident in the treatment effects or the difference between the treated and the control. And even then, it can sometimes be hard to tell if the effects of a certain treatment could be the result of, say, a good management treatment or maybe a good water year, maybe in the case of the desert Southwest. And so basically, we are in need of kind of other approaches that we can ask these questions with. And remotely sensed vegetation cover is one set of data that we could consider using. So these data provide abundant pre-treatment observations at relatively high spatial resolutions. It basically gives us a much bigger pool of data that we can ask some of these questions with. And so one such approach that uses remotely sensed vegetation cover or other sources of information is a causal analysis, which allows us to collect synthetic controls or determine synthetic controls and use an alternative approach through causal analysis to assess treatment effects. So I'll describe what that can look like here. So for example, in the method that we use through DART, the Disturbance Automated Reference Toolset, which is developed by Steve Fick and Mike Denaway, and others with USGS Moab. So this technique relies on gathering land treatments and identifying areas within land treatments that we can extract vegetation cover, in our case remotely sensed data. So this could be all land treatments that meet a certain requirement. They're all, for example, herbicide treatments aimed at reducing shrub cover. And then around each treatment, we select an untreated search radius, kind of a nearby that we think could be a similar environmental characteristics. We could exclude areas that we think would have different vegetation response. So this could be areas that are like roads or areas that have burned recently that we think we couldn't be maybe as confident that any treatment effects or changes in vegetation cover are truly due to the treatment and not due to another disturbance source. And then we extract environment attributes for the entire treated and untreated areas. So in our case, we extracted 24 environmental variables describing topography, things like slope, aspect, elevation, ruggedness, and also soil characteristics such as percent sand, silt, clay within this entire area. And then we calculate environmental similarity using a multivariate index called Gower's distance. And so this calculates the similarity between each of the treated pixels and all of the candidate reference pixels. And then for each of those, we select the top best fitting. So in our case, it's the top 100 best fitting reference pixels for each target or treated area. And then we assess the treatment effects using a causal inference approach. So first we extract whatever response we're interested in. In our case, we used vegetation cover from the Rangeland Analysis Platform, which is a free and publicly available vegetation cover dataset broken into 6-point functional groups. And then for each for each pixel, in a treated pixel in our case, we take the pixel and then the reference, the vegetation response in the reference area, and we build a Bayesian structural time series model based on the pre-treatment cover only in the reference area. And so we build a model for how we think vegetation cover changes over time. And then we compare the observed cover in the reference, or the observed cover in the treated area versus the reference area to have a difference between kind of observed and expected or predicted cover. And that difference is the treatment effect, which then we can analyze using a suite of other approaches. And so we used those techniques to assess treatment effectiveness within a project called Restore New Mexico, which is a collaborative monitoring program partnership between the USDA-ARS at the Jornada and BLM and NRCS and a couple other land management agencies in the area. This has been a project that's occurred for over 20 years, all with a unifying goal of putting land treatments out that are aimed to catalyze perennial grass recovery via brush management or shrub cover reduction for non-native shrub encroachment. And this has covered vast swaths of land throughout southern New Mexico, mostly over the past 20 years. So over 300,000 hectares, have been treated, most of which are initiated and then monitored by Restore New Mexico. So this is a large field campaign. But we wanted to ask questions about it using some of these remotely sensed data approaches. And so we used the this BLM New Mexico public land treatment database and filtered through to find treatments that were herbicide applications aimed at reducing shrub cover for creosote and creosotebush and honey mesquite, which are two either undesirable or non-native species in this area. And so this left us, we filtered out to remove any treatments that were too small to evaluate or mostly that were just too small to evaluate or occurred before we had remotely sensed data to evaluate. And this left us with about 266 treatments. These treatments occurred across a range of almost 40 years. And they ranged in size from about 20 hectares to over 7,000 hectares. So a pretty large range. We have two target shrub species, like I just described. There's creosotebush and honey mesquite. And most of the treatments were aimed at creosote, reducing creosote cover. And those were using the same herbicide at two different application rates. And then there were 4 different treatment methods for mesquite treatment, which are the same treatment chemicals and rates, just applied electrostatically or non-electrostatically. So from these data and using these approaches, we aim to ask questions about what is driving treatment success across the region, across all these treatments, what are the treatment effects, and then within individual treatments, how does treatment success vary? So for the first question, we used a mixed effects modeling approach using the pixel level observations in the treated area, so the treatment effect that I described earlier for each pixel for each plant functional group, so shrubs, bare ground, perennial forbidden grass. And we evaluated this by considering the time since treatment, pre-treatment cover, annual precipitation, ecological site group, and treatment methods. And we considered 3 different random effects with treatment ID, year, and a combination of the two. And finally, we had a weight, which was the Bayesian time series model performance. So into some of our results. Here we have the treatment effect, which is the change, the effect of the treatment. So this is the comparison between the predicted from the Bayesian time series model and the observed, what actually we observed with the remotely sensed data in the treatment for bare ground in tan, perennial forbidden grass in purple, and shrub in orange. And we have time since treatment on the x-axis. So let's look at creosote on the left to start out with. So we see, first of all, a reduction in shrub cover after a couple of years, and then an increase in perennial forbidden grass cover after 4 or 5 years. So maybe we think there's some sort of time lag effect for when the shrub reduction was first effective and kind of a lag in response from the perennial herbaceous vegetation. And then for the mesquite, we see a more of an immediate response in shrub cover, so an immediate reduction and then a kind of a slow creep up back towards kind of pre-treatment, similar to, well, not pre-treatment condition, but similar cover to the reference area. And we see the perennial forbidden grass cover starts higher, we see a big flush after the treatments, and then kind of decreasing over time. We can ask these same questions with ecological site group considerations or treatment methods. And so here we have all the functional groups with treatment effect on the x-axis, and these are the estimated marginal means from the mixed effects model. And so if there was any difference between, response within ecological site groups or treatment methods, we would expect for the dots to kind of be different for one panel. And so the only real difference that we see is within the mesquite treatments, there was a significant difference in treatment effect for if the treatments were applied electrostatically versus without electrostatic. And so this is encouraging for, showing that maybe electrostatic applications are being more effective, and we're seeing a better, decrease in shrub cover and increase in perennial forbidden grass cover. And then we can also think about treatment variability. So I'll show some preliminary results for how we're thinking about quantifying within treatment variability. And this is kind of one of the main, different types of questions and things that we could think about using this DART approach and remotely sensed data, is that we have a lot more observations to kind of play with and think about how to ask questions with. So we approach this by dividing vegetation response into success categories. So for shrub cover, if 5 years after treatment, the modeled shrub cover in the treated area was reduced or lower than we would expect based on the reference observations, then we would deem that a success. So shrub cover reduced, success after 5 years. And for perennial herbaceous, it was the opposite. So if perennial herbaceous cover was increased 5 years after treatment, and if that increase was more than any bare ground loss, because we wanted to compensate for any bare ground loss, then we would deem that a success. So I'll just show simple maps of how we're thinking about approaching this to start out. So here we have one treatment that was applied in 2007 in an area to treat creosotebush. And so up on the upper 3 panels, we see shrub cover, bare ground cover, perennial forbidden grass cover, and the percent change. This is 5 years post-treatment. So we can see that there's quite a range, and there's maybe some spatial patterning and variability within the treatment even for, what the effects were. And then if we think about these success bins, there is similar variability. And so this might be one way that we could think about describing this variability, and we are looking forward to doing some more analyses which look at individual treatments and try to classify what we think could be driving success and provide some management recommendations resulting from that. Okay, so some of our key findings related to kind of a time lag effect between creosote and mesquite bush recovery, or honey mesquite recovery, and then we also observed some differences between herbicide application types for the treatment effects. And some of the main contributions that I think that we can think about from this work is that we're able to ask sort of different questions than we would be able to with just field data. So we're able to maybe fill some spatial and temporal gaps, and while we were still able to use a lot of local knowledge and information for deciding which areas to evaluate, which areas should maybe be excluded from different disturbances, and this is a very management question driven approach in terms of classifying success, and it could be adjusted to, different management objectives. And so really looking forward to continuing working on this project. And thanks so much for listening, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the session. Thanks to all of the great folks at the Jornada Experimental Range, Mike Dunaway and Gail Tyree with USGS Moab and the BLM District Office, Las Cruces District Office, for all of their help with this project. And my contact information is on the screen, Georgia Harrison at montana.edu, and I'd be happy to talk with anyone about this project anymore. Thanks.